You know, if you were to look at a brain scan of someone, just as their phone lights up with a new text message notification,
Right.
and then you compared that to a scan of someone receiving a tiny, like a microdosed hit of cocaine,
Yeah,
you actually wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
you really wouldn't. I mean, to the neurological hardware inside your head, the exact same circuitry is firing.
Which is just wild.
It is. The brain doesn't categorize the source of the hit.
Right.
It only registers the arrival of the stimulus.
And that is incredibly jarring when you stop to really sit with it. Like, we're walking around with these glowing rectangles in our pockets, just completely unfazed by the fact that a 20-second video triggers the exact same chemical reward cascade as a massive real-life achievement.
Yeah.
We're talking about the same neurological payoff for tapping a piece of glass as you would get from a goal you spent, months working toward.
The scale of reward has just been entirely flattened. And the frequency of that flattening is what makes this so critical.
Right.
Because we're looking at data showing the average person now touches their phone over 2,000 times a day.
Wow. 2000.
Over 2,000. And most of those touches happen without a single conscious thought. It's become this phantom reflex, an automatic loop that just reinforces a very specific expectation every single time you close it.
And that phantom reflex is basically the gateway into what we're exploring in today's deep dive. We are talking about the cheap reward trap.
Such a good name for it.
It really is. So our mission today is to map out the neuroscience of why the human brain has developed this overwhelming preference for fast, low-effort pleasure.
Yes.
We've got incredible insights from Stanford University, the University of Michigan, and the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And we're going to look at how this invisible preference is quietly draining your ambition and exactly how to recalibrate your mind so you can actually enjoy slow, meaningful satisfaction again.
But before we even begin to unpack the escape routes, we kind of have to look under the hood.
Right, at what's actually happening in there.
Exactly. What the brain is craving when you mindlessly reach for that screen. And that requires discarding a very popular myth right off the bat.
Yeah, I think most of you listening probably already know that the whole dopamine equals pleasure idea has been thoroughly debunked.
Completely.
We know it's not the feeling of satisfaction, it's the craving, right? It's the motivation, the chemical of anticipation.
Yes, exactly.
But what the data from Stanford University reveals that is truly surprising, to me at least, is how heavily that dopamine release relies on the speed and the certainty of the reward.
Right. The Stanford research zeroes in on variable, unpredictable rewards.
Like a slot machine.
Like a slot machine or, a social media feed. From an evolutionary standpoint, unpredictability meant foraging.
Oh, right. Because our ancestors didn't know which bush had the berries.
Exactly. They didn't know, so the brain pumped out dopamine to keep them searching, because the next bush might be the jackpot.
So it's a survival mechanism.
It is a pure survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And today, tech platforms weaponize that exact drive. The feeling of, well, maybe the next scroll will be the really good one.
Right, the funny video.
Yeah, it hijacks that foraging drive, and that activates the brain's dopamine system far more powerfully than a predictable, stable reward ever could.
So we're essentially just foraging for digital berries all day.
We really are.
And the speed of that search is what locks us in. But I want to look at the long-term cost of this because the work coming out of the University of Michigan suggests a much darker consequence than just wasting an hour on the couch.
Much darker.
They explored what happens when you expose the brain to these fast, easy rewards chronically.
Yeah, they found this neurological blunting effect.
Yeah.
Your brain's sensitivity to slower, more effortful rewards physically decreases.
Wow. Physically decreases.
Yes. It isn't that your big life achievements suddenly lost their value, or that you stopped caring about your career or your family. The problem is that your neurological baseline for excitement has quietly shifted upward.
So the threshold to feel anything at all just requires more and more stimulation.
Exactly.
It's kind of like listening to music at maximum volume all day long.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Right. Eventually, a normal human conversation just sounds like a whisper. And not because the person is speaking quietly, but because you've basically temporarily deafened yourself.
Yes.
It makes you wonder, has the modern world made our long-term goals too quiet to hear?
I mean, the volume of our environment is turned up so aggressively that the natural, quiet satisfaction of deep work simply fails to register anymore.
Which is terrifying.
And the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the NIDA, confirms this exact phenomenon.
Mhm.
Their documentation shows that the brain's reward pathway stops distinguishing between chemical substances and behavioral habits when the behavioral reward is that instantaneous.
Wait, really? It stops distinguishing.
Completely.
That,
Quick dopamine spike is a quick dopamine spike, whether you ingested a substance or you just scrolled past a viral video.
that is wow. And because that baseline for excitement has shifted so drastically, the symptoms of being caught in this trap, they don't usually look like a full-blown crisis, right?
No, not at all.
They disguise themselves as completely normal, everyday behaviors, like it's deciding to reorganize your desk instead of starting that difficult proposal you need to write.
Right, the classic productive procrastination.
Exactly. You tell yourself you aren't being lazy. You're like, hey, I'm actually doing something productive.
But you're choosing the desk because organizing it gives your brain a fast, tangible sense of completion with basically zero cognitive friction.
That makes so much sense.
Or consider that strange, profound relief you might feel when a meeting is suddenly canceled.
Oh my gosh, yes. The best feeling.
Right. And often, it isn't even a meeting you were dreading. You feel relieved because that block of time can now be filled with something easier, something that demands way less of your depleted prefrontal cortex.
And the strangest symptom mentioned in the research, at least to me, is this bizarre guilt people start to feel after they actually manage to sit down and finish a meaningful, difficult task.
Yes, the post-work guilt.
It is so weird. It's almost as if, because the satisfaction was slow and quiet, the brain interprets the work as less legitimate than the loud, quick hit of a cheap reward.
Your brain essentially penalizes you for doing deep work because it didn't come with, confetti or a notification sound or an immediate metric of approval.
No likes or retweets on writing a tough email.
Exactly.
What really fascinates me, though, is that this shifted baseline doesn't look the same for everyone. It hits you completely differently depending on the stage of life you're in.
It does. Context matters a lot here.
Like, if you are 22, getting hooked on cheap rewards is doing something entirely different to your psychology than if you are 45.
Let's break that down, actually, starting with the 20 to 28 demographic. During those years, your core adult identity is still physically and psychologically forming. So when cheap rewards dominate that window, the brain is trained toward constant comparison and instant validation before you have even figured out who you are outside of a screen.
Oh, that's heavy. So the dopamine loops are dictating your values rather than your actual lived experiences.
Precisely. And then you hit that 28 to 35 window, which the data identifies as peak pressure.
Oh, yeah. Career demands, serious relationships, family expectations, financial stress. It just all converges at once.
And in that high-pressure stage, the cheap reward shifts.
Yeah,
It goes from being an identity builder to being an escape valve.
right.
You aren't reaching for the phone because you lack ambition. You're reaching for it because you are overwhelmed, you're cognitively exhausted, and you lack better coping tools.
It's just the path of least resistance for a really tired mind.
Ex-
Which brings us to the older demographics. The 35 to 45 group, and then the 45 plus group. I would imagine by that point, the habits are so deeply ingrained it feels impossible to change.
Well, think of neural pathways like a river carving a canyon.
Okay.
At 25, you can still divert the water fairly easily.
Yep.
But by 45, the water is at the bottom of a really deep gorge. The grooves of your reward-seeking behavior are profound.
So you're just stuck.
No, not at all. Neuroscience confirms the brain remains plastic. It is changeable at every age.
Oh, good.
It just requires significantly more environmental friction to change the river's course. For the 45 and older group, we often see this quiet, existential frustration.
What does that look like?
It's the realization that decades of effort haven't produced the expected depth of satisfaction, largely because that satisfaction was leaking out through these cheap digital release valves every single day.
Wow. Leaking out. That is a brutal image. But wait, I need to play devil's advocate here for a second, or at least voice what I know some of you listening are probably thinking.
Go for it.
If we just blame our biology and the tech engineers who design these platforms, aren't we letting ourselves off the hook way too easily?
It sounds like it, sure.
Right, like, aren't we surrendering our agency and just saying, oh, it's not my fault, my brain was hijacked? Isn't this ultimately just a lack of discipline?
I mean, it is so tempting to frame it as a moral failing or a simple lack of willpower, but doing so completely ignores the physiological reality of the trap.
How so?
Relying on willpower alone to fight a team of thousands of engineers who used evolutionary psychology to design systems specifically to hijack your dopamine, That is a mathematically losing battle.
Thousands of engineers versus one tired brain at 9 p.m.
Exactly. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It's seeking the most efficient caloric and emotional reward. Willpower is a finite resource. Environmental design is not.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the physical reaction?
What do you mean?
Like, I understand getting intellectually distracted by a phone, but why does it feel physically uncomfortable, like an actual skin-crawling restlessness, to just sit and read a physical book or do deep work now?
Because that physical discomfort is quite literally dopamine withdrawal.
Withdrawal, like an actual addict.
Yes. Your nervous system is protesting the sudden absence of high-frequency stimulation. When you sit down with a physical book, the pacing is incredibly slow compared to a digital feed.
Right.
So your brain sends distress signals, and that manifests as physical restlessness, urging you to abandon the slow task and find a faster hit.
And people misinterpret that physiological withdrawal as a sign that they, just can't focus anymore.
Right, when in reality, they're just experiencing a detox phase.
That is huge to recognize. And this cheap reward cycle, it doesn't operate in a vacuum, does it? The research highlights this brutal co-occurrence with the procrastination and perfectionism loop.
Oh, absolutely. They feed on each other.
Right. Because you are terrified your work won't be perfect, so the task feels insurmountable. The moment that anxiety spikes, your brain demands a way to self-soothe.
And you reach for the cheap reward.
Boom. Every time.
It also preys on chronic comparison. Every time you scroll, you reset your baseline of what success looks like based on highly curated highlights.
Which makes your own slow, messy progress feel even more inadequate.
Exactly. And that drives a spike of cortisol, which in turn drives you right back to the cheap reward for immediate comfort. It is a perfectly closed loop.
There is a story in the research about a graphic designer named Sarah that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, the creativity video.
Yes. She kept putting off her actual creative projects because she felt too mentally drained. But then one night, she realized she had spent 2 solid hours watching short videos about creativity without actually creating a single thing herself.
The illusion of progress.
Exactly.
She felt she was engaging with her craft, but she was merely consuming the aesthetics of it.
And then there's Michael, the high school teacher from the data. He genuinely loved his job and used to be a voracious reader. But after a long day of grading, he told himself he deserved to relax, which always meant staring at his phone.
And he didn't recognize the depth of his shifted baseline until a student asked for a book recommendation.
Yeah, and Michael realized he hadn't possessed the attention span to finish a book in over 6 months.
In both cases, the cheap reward masqueraded as something helpful. Inspiration for Sarah, relaxation for Michael.
And when you suddenly wake up and realize you are Sarah or Michael, the natural reaction is to get incredibly angry at yourself.
Of course.
But there is a detail in the data that completely flipped my perspective on this, and it's that shame itself functions as a cheap reward.
The neurological mechanism behind shame in this context is truly fascinating.
It blew my mind.
Beating yourself up after wasting 2 hours on your phone provides a quick, intense emotional spike.
Right, it gives you this momentary feeling that you are holding yourself accountable, that you're doing something about it.
Yes, it feels productive in the moment, but it changes absolutely nothing about your behavior.
You just substitute the cheap reward of scrolling for the cheap reward of self-punishment.
It provides the illusion of resolve without the friction of actual change.
So if willpower is a losing battle, and beating ourselves up is just a trap door to another cheap reward, how do we actually recalibrate?
Right, the million-dollar question.
How do we build that environmental friction you mentioned earlier?
Well, the overarching principle is that you cannot outthink a biological reflex. You have to change the landscape you operate in to delay the reflex.
Okay.
Friction means making the cheap reward physically harder to access.
Like leaving the phone in another room.
Yes.
Which sounds almost too simple, but the research shows it dramatically drops automatic reaching behavior.
Because you are introducing a physical delay. When the phone is in your pocket, the action takes less than a second. Your conscious brain isn't even involved.
It's just muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when the phone is in the kitchen and you are in the living room, obtaining it requires standing up and walking.
Right.
And in those 5 seconds of physical friction, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical decision-making center, has enough time to boot up and ask, well, wait, do I actually want to look at this right now, or am I just bored?
It gives you that beat to actually choose. We also have to address the biological battery powering that prefrontal cortex, though. because the data emphasizes how poor sleep directly sabotages this entire process.
Oh, completely. If you are sleep deprived, you are physically depleting the neural energy in your prefrontal cortex.
And it impairs the brain's ability to regulate impulses, right?
Yes, a fatigued brain is measurably more likely to seek out fast, low-value rewards because it literally lacks the glucose and structural energy to pursue slow, complex ones.
And refined sugar compounds the exact same mechanism.
It really does.
Ultra-processed foods trigger their own fast dopamine spikes, and that reinforces the exact same reward-seeking neural pathways carved out by your digital habits.
The dietary cheap reward and the digital cheap reward just feed each other.
Which is why the recalibration process requires behavioral changes that feel somewhat counterintuitive.
Very counterintuitive.
I actually want to talk about one of those behavioral changes because I tried it yesterday.
Oh, really?
The research calls it productive boredom.
Yes. A great technique.
So I was standing in line at the grocery store, and the person in front of me had an issue with their payment, so we were all just standing there waiting. And normally, my phone would be in my hand instantly.
Of course.
Instead, I forced myself to just stand there, and let me tell you, it felt agonizing for about 30 seconds.
I bet. But what you experienced in those 30 seconds was the active repair of your dopamine baseline.
Really?
Yes. You were rebuilding your brain's tolerance for the natural lag between effort and payoff. By sitting in that unstimulating moment without immediately filling it, you were teaching your nervous system that a lack of constant input is not an emergency.
That makes me feel much better about awkwardly staring at the gum rack.
You were doing the work.
Another strategy for environmental design from the sources is leveraging the associative nature of the brain, specifically in the morning.
Right.
If the very first thing you do when you wake up is reach for a screen, you are associating your peak morning energy with instant stimulation.
Because your brain maps the environment.
Yeah.
If you start the day with something effortful, even just 10 minutes of journaling or stretching or reading a few pages of a physical book, you wire the brain to associate morning energy with effort and delayed payoff.
You essentially set the neurological tone for the next 12 hours.
Exactly.
The sources also suggest batching your cheap rewards into specific windows rather than allowing them on demand.
This is a huge one.
Like if you know you get to check your feeds at lunch and at 5 p.m., your brain stops scanning the environment for that reward every 3 minutes.
Because the anxiety of deprivation drops significantly, the reward is guaranteed later, so that constant low-level distraction that shatters your deep work is just eliminated.
There is one strategy I found incredibly effective, even if it sounds a bit ridiculous.
Naming the trap out loud.
Yes. When you find yourself mindlessly opening a new tab or picking up the device, you literally say aloud, "This is a cheap reward."
It isn't ridiculous at all, though. It is a proven neurological hack.
Why does it work so well?
Speaking out loud engages the language centers of the brain, which forces conscious processing. It pulls you out of the autonomic nervous system's reflex and forces the prefrontal cortex to acknowledge the action.
So it snaps you out of the trance.
Exactly.
I do have to point out the ultimate irony mentioned in all of this data, though.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Because the moment high-achieving people hear all this, the immediate impulse is to try and hack their way out of it.
Right.
We think, okay, I'm going to download a new app blocker. I'm going to set up a complex habit tracker dashboard with color-coded graphs to monitor my dopamine detox.
Which, ironically, becomes yet another cheap reward.
Right. You get the quick, completely unearned satisfaction of feeling organized and highly productive without having to do any real deep work.
You just spent 3 hours building a productivity system instead of actually writing the essay or finishing the project.
It is the organizational equivalent of Sarah watching videos about creativity.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The objective here is not to create more busy work or self-flagellation. The goal is simple awareness and environmental friction.
And to be incredibly clear to everyone listening, the goal is not total restriction. We aren't suggesting you throw your devices into a lake and live off the grid.
No, because total restriction reliably backfires.
Right.
It creates a starvation mindset that leads to a massive rebound effect. The cheap reward eventually feels so irresistible that you just binge on it. The goal is simply to moderate the cheap rewards to a level where your brain has the space, the silence, and the neurological baseline to remember what deep, slow, genuine satisfaction actually feels like.
It's about turning the volume knob of your environment back down so you can hear a normal conversation again. You know, reviewing all this research on how rapidly our neurobiology has adapted to this engineered landscape, It leaves me with a thought I just haven't been able to shake.
What is that?
Well, we are adult humans who lived in a world before this level of instant gratification existed, right?
Right.
We have memories of what a slower world felt like, and our brains were still hijacked this easily. We still struggle to sit in silence. So how might future generations, kids who have never ever known a world without instant digital rewards, redefine the very concepts of ambition and patience?
That is a staggering proposition.
Right. If the baseline is permanently shifted from birth, will the sheer ability to focus on a slow, difficult task eventually become a rare luxury skill?
I mean, the ultimate competitive advantage of the future might not be intelligence. It might simply be the ability to endure boredom.
Something to ponder the next time you hear that notification chime. Does it sound like a message, or does it sound like a trap? We will leave you with that to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.